Okay. One, just getting started later than I wanted to. Two, technical difficulties when I started the live stream. I apologize. Somewhat couldn't be helped, but here we go. Let's try this again. Okay. All right. Welcome back, everybody, to this live stream here. Those who are watching and those who will be watching. Check this out here. We're going to go through some continued beginner music theory. Now, there's something that I thought about when we did the last stream, and that was some of my students, particularly violin students, have some issues where, and I can remember this when I was younger too, so I wanted to address some of this. Okay, let me back up. Even with between B and C and E and F, where the natural half steps occur, and I'll discuss that in just a second, some people are wondering, well, yeah, but on my violin, I can slide, right? I can slide from note to note. Or if you're playing guitar, I can slide from pitch to pitch, right? What happens in between those letters? What happens in between those notes? Well, in reality, in Western music, there's nothing between those notes. Really, what's happening is your note's either in tune or it's out of tune. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you've got a B, right? So like on the violin, it's a first finger on the A string, okay? And let's say you're playing that first finger on the A string, but it's a little too high, right? So like on your tuner, it's registering on the high side. Well, what's happening is you're in between this space right here, between the C. You can probably hear my dog there. Anyway, sorry about that. They're in between this space right here, this B and this C. Well, technically, if you're playing a piano, that's why I drew the picture of the piano, because it's a little bit easier to understand this way. There's no note there. There's no note between those things. These are natural half steps, okay? So like a regular one on the A string on your violin to a low two on the A string, there's no note between those two. Although on the violin, you can slide from B to C, right? Well, that's kind of what I wanted to address here. These are the natural half steps. There's no notes between here, although on stringed instruments, you can slide between the two of them, okay? But don't be confused, okay? If your first finger is a little too high on the violin, it's actually sharp. It's out of tune. It's an out of tune B, or it could be interpreted as an out of tune C. In other words, a low two that's too low. Okay, that's too close to a first finger on the B string. Okay, so I wanted to address that right off the bat, right out the gate, because there's some confusion there. If you play a stringed instrument, I can remember when I first started this thinking, well, yeah, but I can slide. How do I know exactly where this, that, and the other? That's one of the reasons why I use the tapes. You know, there's various different brands of tapes you can use to put on your violin. And in the early days, I just used electrical tape, right? And we just put electrical tape on your violin to show you exactly where to put your fingers. And there's a reason for that. Again, getting back to this, okay? Remember, let's just recap real fast. These letters right here, and of course the five notes that we make with sharps and flats, these are the only notes we have available to us by technicality. Anything else between these, right here, is technically out of tune. Okay, it's just an out of tune one of these 12 notes, right? So anyway, I wanted to address that real quick. Now let's get into those 5 notes that we talked about last week, and let's talk about sharps and flats a little bit more, because I'm going to get into the whole idea of half steps and whole steps. So when you look at this chart right here, B to C is a natural half step. Now you're gonna see me notate that as like a half triangle or like a bottomless triangle or something, right? That's how you're gonna see me do that. So here to here, E to F is another natural half step. Okay. Now, what does that do for us? That means that everything else here. Now, what does that do for us? That means that everything else here is a whole step. So check this out. Ready? Whole step, whole step, whole step, whole step, whole step. Now, here's B. We'd go back to a C here, right? We'd go back to a C there, okay? And so that's what you're looking at. Now, you've got these black keys right here, okay? You've got these black keys. And these black keys actually give us, I don't know if you guys can hear that. Let me know if you can hear that. I'll take care of that in a second. My dog is outside. She's a little bit frustrated that she's still outside. But I'll take care of that. If it's getting too loud in the feed here, just let me know in one of the comments and I'll let her in and take care of that situation. Okay. Otherwise I'll just continue because I know everybody's time is valuable. All right. So coming up here, now these are whole steps, but here's the thing that I want you to remember. That means that from C to D, there's a note between here. And it essentially looks like this relationship, this half step, right? There's nothing between B and C. That means that there's nothing between C and this black key right here. That's another half step. So let's go up top here and let's go like this. Okay, there's a half step right there. Does that make sense? Everybody getting that? Okay, now let's move on. That means from this black key to D is another half step. Okay, so we're going to come up here. We're going to do like that right there. Okay, and that just again just visually shows you where the natural half steps are occurring. Now, all right, intervals are interesting. What we're talking about with half steps and whole steps is we're talking about intervals. Now you've got to have a starting point. Okay, and the analogy I use for this is those of you who are old enough to go on trips or drive yourself, right? You have to have a starting point for Google Maps. Okay, so imagine that you're doing Google Maps, right? And it doesn't matter where you live. Let's make up a destination for a second, okay? Let's say you're starting in Tennessee, okay? But you want to get to Washington State, right? You've got to put in Google Maps that you're in Tennessee, wherever that city in Tennessee is, right? And then from there, Google Maps can plot you a course to Washington State, right? Now, obviously, there's not nearly the distance between, half steps or whole steps as it is from Tennessee to Washington State. But the deal is you've got to have a starting point. If you don't have a starting point, you don't have an interval, what we call an interval. So that's the next concept. Oh, hello. We focused? We are not focused. Let me stop moving. Okay, sorry about that. It's never happened like that before. Okay, so the word that we're going to write down is intervals. Okay, INTERVALS, intervals. That's what these are. We've got to have a starting point. So, for example, going back to B, here's my starting point. And if I want one half step above B, my very next note is a C. Okay, does that make sense? Now, remember, if you ever get confused about intervals, think about Google Maps. Okay, the interval from my town to the next town, but I've got to have a starting point. It's got to start in my town or wherever you are. Washington D.C. and I want to get to Buffalo, New York. Right? I'm making it up. Okay, but you've got to have a starting point. You've got to have an ending point. And that's how you can discover and figure out intervals. In other words, the distance from one letter to another letter or one note to another note. There's various different nuances to this that we can do, okay? But this is essentially the nuts and bolts of it, okay? So again, if this doesn't make sense, let me know in the comments or let me know in the chat here, and I will I'll help you out with that, okay, in future. Now, moving on here, all right? Coming back up top, we have this interval between C and this note right here. It's a half step, okay? Now, that's a black key, all right? That is its own note, but it uses either the letter C or the letter D to identify it. Now, here's where things get a little funky, and this is where some students can get a little confused, okay? These black keys have two letter names. I know. It's possible for them to have two letter names. And here's where the next word comes into play. That word is inharmonic. Okay, I'm going to write it down. I want you to just hold it in your brain. Okay, trust me, it's not as complicated as it sounds. I'm going to walk you through it. But inharmonic, let's write that down. ENHARMONIC. Okay, they're called inharmonic pitches. Okay, inharmonic pitches. All right. I don't know if is this a mirrored image for you guys? Let me know, because it looks like it's backwards when I'm writing here. Does it read left to right for everybody? This is just a side note for my sanity. I don't know what's going on here, but when I look at the screen, it looks back. Anyway, let me know, because it's bugging me out here. Anyway, continue. Inharmonic pitches. Now, what that means is I've got to take sharps and flats to create the letter name for this black key right here. Now, this will apply to the other black keys as well, okay? But I'm going to show you just this first one, okay? You ready? This is where we get, and some of you are in your books at this right now. We're discussing this in our private lessons, okay? So C, I'm going to raise it a half step, okay? Now, who remembers what we call an accidental, okay? Who remembers the accidental symbol? Okay. And it's not like an accident. It's, in other words, like, oops, I tripped. Not accident or like that. Not accidental like that. It's just what we call these symbols that tell us whether we're raising a pitch a half step, lowering a pitch a half step, or we can cancel out a sharp or a flat. Now, those symbols are, I just gave it away, sharps, okay, which look like hashtags, we talked about last time, and flats, which look like lowercase b's essentially, or really fancy lowercase b's, right? Now, let's say I've got a sharp or a flatted note, and I want to cancel that sharp or flat. In other words, I don't want it to be a sharp or a flat anymore. I want it to be a natural note with no sharp or flat. Okay. Remember, natural notes are their own unique pitches. Okay. They exist just plain and simple, like B, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, like we discussed a couple weeks ago. They just exist. They're there, right? We don't have to do anything to make them. They are just there. Okay. And I mean, I get that you can definitely argue the same is true for the other 5 pitches. Okay. In Western music, but it's easier to think about it like this. Now, if I don't want a sharp or a flat, there's a symbol that tells me, hey, cancel that sharp, or hey, cancel that flat. That is called the natural symbol. I know it's not terribly creative, but it keeps things simple and it keeps us from getting confused. Okay. So that looks like this. Okay. That funky little symbol. Oh, can you guys see that? Let me make sure you guys can see that. There we go. Okay. And that's what that symbol looks like. So sharp. Okay. Flat, spelt just like you think it would be, F-L-A-T. And then this is a natural, spelt just like you think it would be, N-A-T-U-R-A-L. For sharp, it's S-H-A-R-P. For the younger generation, sharps look like hashtags. For my generation and folks before me, they look like pound signs, okay? Before the telephone generation, I don't know that there was anything actually that looked like a sharp. I think it was sharp was just a sharp, period, across the board. I think, I don't know that there was anything that represented that was used for before the telephone generation. Once we got the telephone generation, it became a pound sign. And then once we got the social media generation, it became the hashtag. So there you go. Now, flat is a B. I don't think there's anything else that's used for that. Natural, same thing. I don't know that of anything that's used for that other than flat or naturals. So let me know if you know anything about it, but I don't. That might be used for. Okay, so going back over here. Let's say I want to raise a pitch a half step. We're going to use this sharp symbol. Okay, so let's apply that to our C natural. I want to raise it a half step. So I'm going to C sharp it. C sharp. Okay, now let's say, however, okay, that I'm on a D and I want to lower it a half step. Okay, a flat lowers a pitch a half step. Okay, so I'm going to D flat it to the same black key. Okay, and when you write it like this. Let me give you an example. So here's a D flat, here's a D flat. You write it up there up top of it. It's just to keep things simple, right? We don't want to make things too confusing. You got a D, make it a uppercase D, use a lowercase b, and it makes it a D flat. Now for a C sharp, there you go, right there. That should suffice. Okay, now C sharp, D flat. Now here's the thing though, watch this. It's still this one black key. It just has 2 letter names. Now it's kind of a slick little trick here because it really doesn't, it's its own pitch, right? Like if you look on a frequency graph of like, scientific frequency graph of this stuff, a C sharp is a D flat, is a C sharp is a D flat. It doesn't change. It doesn't, like it's its own pitch. It's not a C, it's not a D, it's a C sharp / D flat. That's what it is. Okay, so don't let that confuse you. This is just one single pitch right here. It's just that in sheet music reading, due to the way that we construct and use key signatures and scales, which we'll talk about either at the end today or next week, we have to have the ability to raise a pitch a half step or lower a pitch a half step. And that's why we get the inharmonic pitches, which is a big fancy phrase that just means one pitch that has 2 names. That's all that is. Inharmonic pitches means one pitch with 2 names. That's it. Okay, so you've got a C sharp / D flat right there. Okay, now since I went through the concept of this, I'm going to roll through this, and I'm going to put these letter names, these double letter names up here in relatively short order, okay? So the next one we've got here is a D. Now, let's say we want to sharp that. We want to raise that a half step, okay? So we're going to do a D sharp to this black key, okay? So it's going to be a D sharp slash what? E. Let's say we want to lower it a half step, E flat, okay? And that's how you get that black key right there, okay? Now remember, I want you to understand this. This all applies to violin. It all applies to guitar. It all applies to bass guitar. It all applies to technically even drums, because you have to tune drums a lot of times, especially timpani, okay? And marimba, if you play marimba, your marimba is going to look exactly like this. Okay, it's basically exactly like this. Okay, it's basically a piano hit with mallets, okay, essentially. All right, so keep that in mind. This is applying to all of our music theory endeavors, okay, sheet music, everything. All right, and just remember, music theory is a way to categorize what you're hearing. It's just a way to organize what you're hearing, because eventually, I can do this. I can actually do this. Eventually, when you hear a song, you know what key it's in, I can tell you what pitch it is that I'm hearing just by hearing it, just by listening to it. Now, here's the thing. It's not rocket science, okay? It's not brain surgery. I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to keep going through this slowly, and we'll all understand it in good time, okay? So don't worry. I'll help you guys out, okay? All right, moving on. E to F, naturally occurring half step, right? So no notes between it, okay? No notes between it, all right? Now, we have an F. Now, F to G is not a naturally occurring half step, which means that there's a pitch between there, okay? So let's do an F sharp. Let's raise it a half step, F sharp, okay? So we've got F sharp slash G. Now let's lower it a half step, flat, G flat, okay? G flat. There you go. All right, now let's move on. Now G to A, not a naturally occurring half step, as we can see here, demonstrated by this, okay? Now we're going to go G to the next pitch, the very next half step, which is this black key, G sharp, okay? Let me just erase this a little bit. G sharp slash A, want to lower to half step, A flat, okay? I know, I'm sorry. My handwriting's terrible. I'm doing the best I can. All right, so we got an A flat, okay? Now, and if you want to at home, I'm going to put this back up on the YouTube channel. Go through this and make your own chart and write in your own things. Hopefully I'm saying it enough times so that you can pick it out and write it down. I highly recommend it. The chart will help you. Chart will help you organize it in your brain, and it'll give you a good head start on this stuff. Okay, moving forward. This is our last one, okay? Now we have A, go up a half step. This is a naturally occurring whole step, A to B, right? So A sharp up here, okay? A sharp to B flat, okay? B flat, okay? There you go. And then, of course, once we get here, obviously there's so much more piano on either side, right? But it's just for space, we're not going to do it. We could go to the very next one would be what? It'd be a C. Right? And then we're back to square one, and we're just rolling and going down everything again. Okay, now let's count. Let's count these notes up top. Remember last week you said there was an extra how many notes? 5. Okay, an extra 5 notes, pitches, 5 notes slash pitches. I'm using them interchangeably right now, okay? In addition to these naturally occurring letters, right? So let's make it simple on ourselves. Let's go from A. A, B, C, D, right here. Sorry, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Now remember, I'm not going to count A in this discussion because that would just be. I'll discuss this in a minute. An octave. Okay, I'll discuss that in a second. That's an octave. Okay, and I'm not going to use that right now because I just want the 7 unique letter pitches plus the 5 unique middle pitches. Count with me. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pretty cool, huh? I know. I'm a music nerd, but that's what I do. Okay. So 7 plus 5, 12. We're back to the 12 unique pitches in all of Western music. That's it. Why do I keep using the phrase Western music? Okay. Some of you may know this. I've discussed this with you already. Western music is basically the tradition that we have assigned to the music that sprang up out of mostly Europe. Okay, back in, oh gosh, we're gonna go way back to Gregorian stuff. I mean, we're talking like 1300s and even before that. Okay, my history is a little bit faded on this, but I think the tradition goes even back to the 1200s, 1200 AD, and goes from there. Now, Western music we didn't, on paper at least, come into its own till kind of, I don't know, I would say the 1500s when they really started nailing down some things. And then 1600s was, I call it the explosion. I'm sure there's some professors that don't, that consider the 1500s kind of the explosion, and that's fine. That was kind of the Renaissance period. There's wiggle room for dates there. But the 1600s, about mid 1600s was when Baroque music really started exploding. And that's kind of the Bach time period, a bunch of other very, very famous composers that we still play music for today. Look in your violin books, they'll find a Bach piece right there. Guitar players. Classical guitar has a ton of pieces that you play from around this time period as well. That's in our guitar book, a Bach piece that we have in our guitar book. So keep that in mind. Very, very popular, very, very common. That's kind of where the music exploded and came out of. And that's where this all has origins, okay? All of this finds its origins starting from that time period on in the Western tradition. Now, in the Eastern tradition, which I'm not as schooled on because they taught us Western tradition music in college. They have things like semitones, and there's another term. But anyway, they basically have notes in between these notes, is kind of how that works out. So I don't teach that. It's a little bit more confusing. And besides that, we don't play that style of music anyways. We play this style of music, okay? Or the Western tradition style of music. Just giving you some history while we're sitting here together. Okay, now, moving on. Let's talk about the octave. That's one thing I want to hit real quick. Okay. Now the octave. All right. Some of you have heard me say this before. What is an 8-legged squishy animal that lives in the ocean? I'll give you a second. 8-legged squishy animal that lives in the ocean. Octopus. Octo for 8. 8 legs, right? Octopus. Okay. What is an 8-sided shape? Any 8-sided shape, 2-dimensional, 8-sided shape. An octagon, okay? Octagon, octo, 8, okay? Octave means 8th note. Well, okay, not in rhythm 8th note. Let me separate that. There are 8th notes in rhythm. This is not the same concept, okay? So just push that aside. Basically, it means a scale or a pattern of letters that adds up to 8, okay? So again, if we start at A, B, C, D, E, F, G, A, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, now, that's not an octave when you do it like this, but if I were to start here at A, well, actually, let me use B. I got an octave right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. That's an octave right there, okay? Starting on this B, going to this B. Now, if you take this and you flip it vertically, what you essentially get is kind of like a building, right? And we've already discussed this, okay? It's as if the first floor and the 8th floor were decorated in exactly the same way. There's nothing different about them except that one is vertically higher than the other, okay? And in this case, the frequencies are such that I'm not going to get too scientific, that they are essentially the same pitch. It's just one vibrates at a faster frequency than the other. That's essentially what it is. Hopefully that makes some sense to you. Let me know, and I'll try to clear that up if it doesn't. Okay, so that's called the octave. Okay, octave. Okay, and that's how you spell that. Octave. Octave. Okay. Now, again, I'm going to put this back up on the YouTube channel. So if you want to rewatch this, go ahead and do that. And I'll tell you what, we're approaching 25 minutes now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close it down. We'll pick back up here next week. Okay. If you've got any questions, leave them in the comments section for me. I'd love to hear them because I'd love to answer them. And we'll pick back up here from octaves. Next week, we'll talk about how intervals are used to construct your scales. Okay, and how we can apply those to your instruments. Namely, I'm going to be talking about how you apply that to the violin and the guitar. okay? The violin and the guitar. All right, so mainly, because that's kind of what we're doing mostly here on the channel and on the website. So if you haven't seen it yet, check back. There's a lot of resources on the website as well, okay? If you haven't yet, subscribe to this YouTube channel because it'll give you notifications when we go live. The Facebook channel is important. I always post what time we're going to do live streams on the Facebook channel. Of course, this week we had technical difficulties. Again, I apologize. But it's usually around 7:30, 7:45, either Saturday or Sunday of the week, okay? So just check back there on the Facebook, like Musilesson on Facebook so you can see that and know when we're going to go live. Yeah, it just gives people a little chance to plan ahead. You know what I mean? I like to try to do that. I need to go to bed. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for sticking with us here tonight. I hope this helped you. I hope you enjoyed it. We're closing it down now. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next week. Remember that music is magic. And thanks for supporting us and being here with Musilesson. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.